subject today is the planets in Dr. Steiner's agriculture course. Now, this has been a vexed question for the 100 years that, since the agriculture course. In 76, I had the impression that the course had to be able to be understood. And so, I set about reading it and studying it like everyone else. And, it's now 40-something years later. And of course, I've had a very strong interest in astrology all that time. And so in many ways, that astrological understanding, experience, insights, I believe has let me look at it in a manner that most other people don't. And so, of course, the planets were always an important image for me. And, I couldn't just drop it or leave it aside. And so over the years, I guess I've developed my own approach to it. And so this is what I'd like to just present today is, my understanding of how I approach this. Now, just to start to give us a context that we can all share, this picture here is, in a sense, our environment. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate is that, Rudolf Steiner's giving us this worldview, and he talks about these 4 energetic activities that we have to address. And it's very easy to see them as some kind of religious belief. But I've come to see that these are real things. And that these real things are sort of based in our astronomy that's around us. And so, when we look out from the Earth, we have, the physical body of the Earth that we are walking on and dealing with and touching and interacting with. And then around the Earth, we have this energetic activity of the atmosphere right out to the edge of the ionosphere. And within that, of course, there's all the oxygen that gives us life, and then there's the Schaumann resonance that's taking place in that environment that we resonate with. And this is the sort of world etheric body. And then we go from that atmosphere into the planetary sphere of the solar system, and that this is the world astral sphere. And then we go to the galaxy, which is where all the stars are, and that this is the world spirit sphere. And so, these are the big energetic activities that we exist within. And these are all real. There's no belief needed here anymore. We know these things to be real. And so we can accept that for a start, that we're dealing with real forces. And of course, we internalize all those activities. And, out of this, we get the 4 kingdoms of nature. But of course, we, the humans, have all of these activities within us. So this is the sort of context. And of course, these spheres aren't hard and fast. They interact with each other. And so we get all these crossover and gray areas and so on that is a mixture of more than just one of these activities. But nevertheless, this is the context that Rudolf Steiner is giving us to look at. Now, I find this is the introduction to Leafgood's book in 1951 called The Workings of the Planets and the Life Processes in man and earth. So this was given in 1951, and this work is really the Steiner doctors coming and giving us their insight, giving us their a snapshot into how they are approaching Rudolf Steiner's work. Now, basically what this is saying is that in every living organism, all of these activities are active. And in the plant, it's a threefold physical and a fourfold etheric activity that work from within outwards, and the astral forces work around it. And the spiritual forces from the starry distance is where the archetypes of the plants are formed. And the effects of these etheric forces are always general ones. Never does an organism come into existence merely through the etheric processes, but only when the astral principle presses its seal upon the ethereal. The working of the astral principle is carried into the physical etheric as a streaming, moving activity, manifesting archetypically in a sevenfoldness. The spiritually working principles gather together the form into specific species and are archetypically arranged according to 12 principles, revealing themselves cosmically in the zodiac. It is only through the spiritual element that the plant becomes a rose or a sage, and the animal a lion, and man a definite individuality. In the plant, the seed is the carrier or the point of attachment of the spiritual forces which form the species, but the seed only unfolds when surrounded by physical, etheric, astral elements in such a way that these forces can stream freely together. So this is the overview, the context, the understanding that we need to bring to biodynamics. And it's very common for people to just talk about an etheric and an astral activity and to really lose the spirit as an active formative principle. We talk about it often as the human being the spirit of the agricultural individuality. And that's quite true, but we also have to see the spirit as a very, very active player in this whole game. Now, I've written an article called "The Spirit in Biodynamics" that's available on my Glenopathy website. So, that whole subject can be explored more. But in a way tonight, what we're dealing with is the astral. We're really wanting to look at how are these planets playing into the game, but also how does Rudolf Steiner talk about them? And there is, this interesting dichotomy where in the first lecture, he tells us about the planets without being very specific. And I think it's very easy to have this idea of, like most of the creation myths, we have the outer planets of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn being the sky father, the cosmic forces, and the inner planets of Moon, Mercury, and Venus being the Earth mother, coming from the earth and sustaining life. And so he doesn't say this specifically, but I think it's generally developed in people's consciousness that these inner planets are coming from below and the cosmic is coming from above. However, in the second lecture, he states the exact opposite to this. And so there's that sort of, okay, we can get that picture. But then, of course, in the sixth lecture, he then comes and says the exact opposite again, which is, to me, like the first lecture. Now, when we actually look at these in the text, they're fairly small amounts of text that he tells these stories. And so it's very easy just to leave them alone and not sort of go there. But for me, they do become a very important structure for understanding how these four principles work into plant growth. And so if we're going to use them, we do need to sort of approach this situation. Now, just to work a little bit more on context for a minute, and you know, we live in a spherical environment. Everything is an energetic sphere. You know, anything that moves and spins creates an electromagnetic field, a spherical field. And of course, those fields are sort of like an onion. There's various shells within the field. And this top picture here is presenting, you know, the purple outside ring is the galaxy, the blue is coming into the solar system, the green is the atmosphere, the yellow is the physical bodies that we find existing within the atmosphere. And then, of course, physical bodies come from the interaction of two opposites, as it were. So we can see this in chemistry as the anions and the cations. We see it in people and plant and animals with a male and a female joining together to give us a physical body. So we have this realm of duality. And then we have the earth itself. The red in the middle is the earth. And so this is this sort of concept that we need to visualize and understand as some reality. Now, when we come to the planets in particular, this bottom image is quite an important image because it's very easy to see the planets as sort of running around on a flat plane. And they do sort of run around the horizontal axis of the solar system, and most of them only get 5 degrees off that horizontal. Pluto does 15 degrees, but it's very easy just to see this as this sort of flat plane. However, Rudolf Steiner points out that these planets exist in shells, and so that the solar system looks like this onion. And yes, the planet runs around just in the middle, but the whole electromagnetic shell is active. And so we get this image of the stars being outside this onion, and those star forces are working through those shells and setting them off as tones. And so we get sort of ding, 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 as these star forces work through the shells. And of course, as the planets move, they warp the shells. And so the tones change according to the positions of the planets. And so that, you know, this is a sort of reality that we need to consider, at least consider. So now, when we come to the agriculture course, we have, you know, many stories in the course itself, but when we come to the energetic stories, we have 2 main stories. And so we can say the 3rd lecture, we're really presented with these 4 main dominant, let's call them, or principal energetic activities of the spirit, astral, etheric, and physical. And he gives us this wonderful image of how these 4 big world activities are brought into matter through the elements of protein. And the medical lectures clarify this quite confusing lecture, and the medical lectures clearly state that hydrogen is the carrier of the spirit, nitrogen, astrality, the etheric is carried by oxygen, and the physical is carried by carbon, and sulfur acts as this oil between these 4 activities for them to be able to work together. And when we come to plants, he tells us a particular way in which all of these 4 activities form and develop. And we get these two pictures on the right-hand side here in the 8th lecture. So it's right at the end, we get the pictures that we need to be able to understand the rest of the course, in my opinion. And so, you know, he gives this interesting picture on the right of how the spirit comes from the stars through the plant, through the cambium, and into the earth, or directly straight into the earth. And this spirit sort of activity of plants accumulates in the soil. And he does say the center of the earth, but, you know, we can just, you know, get this image of it being in the soil. And of course, this is where the physical activities of the roots and so on occur, whereas we have the etheric developing through the leaf realm, and then the astrality lives around the plant, actually in the atmosphere around the whole earth. And so we're getting this idea of these polarities occurring that take place between the spirit and the astral, and then the physical and the etheric. Now, interestingly, we also find this image number 18 in the 8th lecture, and in there he gives us these 4 earthly and cosmic activities, but he places them within the physical body. And he talks about how we have this cosmic substance and earthly forces working in the metabolic system, and in the nerve sense system we have this earthly substance and cosmic forces. I hope I said that correctly. So he's sort of taking this image of these 4 activities and main activities, and showing us a sort of a deeper activity. And so the question comes, what are these cosmic and earthly activities? And when we sort of look at them in his stories, we can see that just as the ethers are these 4 activities within the etheric body, so these cosmic and earthly activities are these 4 activities in the physical body. And so he's giving us these images of these activities that are happening just behind manifestation. We've got the physical substances, but we've got these activities that are just working to push those physical substances around. Now, of course, it's quite important to realize that these activities of the physical body exist within this sort of greater exterior environment as well. And so we can find these activities there. So, you know, as I say, for me, these are the 2 major conversations that are in the course when we're talking about energy. There is a little section in the 2nd lecture where he's talking about the ethers a wee bit, but it's quite passing, as it were, whereas in the, you know, the cosmic and earthly activities are talked about in the 1st lecture, the 2nd lecture, the 4th, the 6th, and the 8th. And then the 4 bodies is talked about very clearly in the 3rd lecture. There's references in the preparations to the energetic activities in the 5th lecture, and to some degree in the 7th lecture, we get another picture of these principal activities. So we've got all these. The problem of the course for me is that these conversations are all mixed up, and we're not quite sure where we are and which part is he talking about, and so on. And so I did go through the course and physically pull it all apart and then put it all back together again. And it's a book called Energetic Activities, which is on my website for free. So you know, it's for me, it's important to sort of clarify these two conversations. Now, when we come to the planets, again, we have these two conversations that we need to look at. And he sort of tells us quite clearly, we can see it, I believe it's at the very end of the second lecture, where we're given this story of just 7 planets, so 6 planets and the sun. And you know, down the bottom of this picture on the right-hand side, you'll see this picture of the animal. And he talks about how the sun comes from the front and the moon comes from the back, and you know, the outer planets work with the sun coming through the front. And you know, in the second lecture at the beginning, he tells us about the agricultural individuality and how we have these outer planet activities working through the root and the nerve sense system, and the inner planets working from above, and how this is like the inverted human. You know, so that we have our outer planets working through this top front part like the animals. But, you know, here we are. So we're given this story of these 7 planets. Now, these 7 planets are interesting. They aren't in an order that we experience them from the Earth, as it were. If we look out from the Earth, we see the moon, and then we see Venus, and then we see Mercury and the sun. That's not the order that we're using here. The reality of this order comes from the speed it takes, or the time it takes, for these planets to go around the body that they go around. So in the case of the planets, it's around the sun. So it's in the order of the speed that they go around the sun. And of course, in the case of the moon, it's going around the Earth. So these, again, are very real rhythms. They're real astronomical rhythms. And we experience these. You know, the fact that Mercury takes us so many days, 90 days or whatever, to go once around, well, we experience that as an organic rhythm in our environment. So this placement of planets in this 7-fold pattern is quite real. And you know, he uses this quite a lot right through the medical lectures and of course in the agriculture course. So it's quite justified that we work with this 7-fold process. However, and we can take this and look at the course, and you know, this top diagram in a way is looking at how these planets work into Rudolf Steiner's story, and we can look at these different energetic activities in regards to this, and how that all works with the preparations and so forth. So that, you know, we can quite rightly understand the agriculture course from this just 7 planets. However, what we find is that we are given a more complex picture than this, and people grapple with this for some time, and of course we come to leaf-good, and I know that leaf-good is considered quite difficult by most people. I don't believe there's very many people that take leaf-good seriously. I know Enzo Nastati does, and has made a very good application of leaf-good's work. And for me, it's become a very central document to understand and work with. And in 1972, in John Soper's Studying the Agriculture course book, when they came to the second lecture, and they, you know, were grappling with this planetary contradiction, they sort of get to the point of saying, oh, leaf-good's there, and that appears to give us a hint of what to do, but we actually can't do anything with that. We can't take it further. because the picture that we're getting from the agriculture course is not exactly the same as what Leafgood gives. And so this becomes a problem of, you know, this bottom picture that is on this page here. It actually shows us this sort of double planetary pattern. Now, this double planetary pattern finds its basis in reality in the zodiac. And so the top picture that we have here is you can see the zodiac on the outside there, and on the inside is the planetary rulers of the zodiac. And so what we're sort of seeing here is that each planet rules two constellations, two signs of the zodiac. And so when we place them around, we sort of get a different zodiac to the Aries Pisces zodiac that we're used to. If we use the planets as the reference, we actually get a zodiac that starts at Cancer and goes backwards through Gemini, Taurus, Aries around to Leo. And Rudolf Steiner uses this zodiac most notably when he talks about the animal kingdom and the species of the animal kingdom. And Eugene Kalisko took this up and followed that on. And in his books, The 12 Groups of Animals, he outlines zoology and the animal kingdom's evolution through this particular zodiac. It's also the zodiac, of course, we use when we're talking about the precession of the equinox. And this outlines this large evolutionary story that Rudolf Steiner uses. And so it's a very, very useful zodiac that I call the archetypal zodiac. And the other zodiac, which is relevant for its own reasons, starting at Aries, I call the manifest zodiac. Now, the interesting question is when we're looking at the planetary rulers of these different zodiac constellations, the question is, why would you start a zodiac at Mars and work around? It's, you know, so these are just interesting questions. But the point really I'm wanting to make here is that we get this double planetary pattern showing up in the zodiac. And so what this is meaning is that, in a sense, the sevenfold planetary pattern that I was talking about earlier is in a way the astral planetary pattern, whereas here we're moving out to the zodiac. So we're moving to the 12-fold pattern. And so this is spiritualizing this astral activity of the planets. So in a sense, we're moving out one circle to the spirit, to be looking at these archetypal processes and forces. And what we see in Leafgood's story is that he tells us how an impulse from the stars comes in and goes through that onion and sort of ding, 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 ding through the planetary spheres to the Earth. And then that accumulated activity comes back out from the Earth and then unfolds into manifestation through the planetary spheres. Now, he calls this the incarnating phase of the planets, and then we have this excarnating phase when manifestation is taking place. I should say in the incarnating phase, this is where the forces of life and so on are being accumulated. We have the seed thought coming from the stars, and Saturn carries that seed thought, and then Jupiter goes, how is that thought fitting into the environment that we have to work with, and goes into Mars. Okay, what forces do we need to make this happen? What are the people and so on that we need? what are the etheric forces we need, and then at that moon phase, right at the bottom, that's really birth. That's the actual germination of the plant. And then as we go through the manifestation phase, we go through these various stages until we hit a completion point at the second Saturn phase. So Leavegood tells us this story. And the first half of the book is really outlining this. And then he sort of comes to this point where he starts to talk about how these forces work in polarities with each other, so that the Saturn 2 force works with the Moon 1 force, and so on, so that we get this image of polarity occurring. But he leaves it as opposites and draws his pictures as opposites. However, when we come to Rudolf Steiner, we get something different. We get this picture at the top of this page here, where he's telling us that polarity of that secondary Saturn process working with the primary moon process is actually occurring in the metabolic system. And so Rudolf Steiner takes this Leavegood story a step further, and he applies it to the physical bodies of things in a manner one step further on than what Leavegood does. And so we get this what I call as a stage 2 pattern of how the planets are working. And then where we see this, we can see that, on the right-hand side of this diagram is really how he describes lecture 2, where we have these earthly processes coming from above and the cosmic processes coming from below. And he's talking about the cosmic and earthly processes and how they're working through the seasons and how they're working into the plant, and how they work through the physical substances of clay and sand and humus and the cations, lime. And so it's almost an image. The last 2/3 of the second lecture is almost a similar image to what we get in the third lecture. But instead of talking about protein, he's talking about these physical substances, which, when you think about them, make up the perfect potting mix. A bit of clay, a bit of sand, a bit of compost, and some sort of minerals. And so it's the same picture. So so we have to sort of look at the second and the sixth lecture together as one thing, not that they're contradicting each other, just that they are two parts of one story. Now, to sort of put this process of moving from one story, Leavegood, to the next story, Steiner, I sort of had to get a slightly bigger context, which is very useful because, of course, the agriculture course isn't the end of Rudolf Steiner's nature lectures. If we look at 1923 in particular, he talked about the natural cycle around about 4 times in 1923. I think early on there's the cycle of the year lectures. Then we have the 4 seasons and the archangels. And then we have these 2 lecture series around October, November of 1923. One is the Man's Symphony of the Creative Word, and the other one is Cosmic Workings in Earth and Man, I believe. And in there's these 2 lectures that he talks about the seasons and the forces that are active in the seasons. And again, he uses a different language to what he uses in the agriculture course. But we can see that the second lecture, where he's talking about the cosmic and earthly activities in the second lecture of the course, fits in with all these other stories. However, if we look at those stories and how he talks about those energies and activities, and if we look into the seasons ourselves, we'll see that actually the planetary pattern that we get is different to this one we get in the agriculture course. So there's a third pattern that I have found, and it's like, how do we understand this? How do we understand these three patterns? And you'll know that in biodynamics, we're always looking at these big cosmic principles and looking to see how those principles are being expressed in life. And one of the basic principles that we have is cell division. And in cell division, we start off with a cell, and then that cell starts to pulsate, and then it divides into two. And so we have this sort of, right at the sort of fundamental basis of creation, we have this process of this threefold process of something being present, and then it starts to pulse, and we can say lemniscate, and then it inverts, flips, and becomes a third, a cell, second cell. So we have these three processes, and one is the archetype, and this is what I see Leafgood's giving us. He's giving us this pattern that we can see in the zodiac. So we have this archetypal process that we see in Leafgood, and then with Rudolf Steiner, we have the second stage, where he's telling us about these forces that are standing just behind creation. And then when we come to the seasons, and I've got to say I found this same pattern in chemistry, we're dealing with manifestations. We're dealing with the reality that we have in front of us. And so it's quite right in that case for these planetary organizations to sort of move through these stages of development. And, as I say, we come in the agriculture course to this second stage where the polarity of the planetary activity is placed within the physical organism of the metabolic system and so on. Now, it's at this point that we actually start looking at this question of direct and indirect planetary activities. Now, this in itself is a very interesting question, because, of course, Rudolf Steiner talked about three different types of direct and indirect planetary activities. And I think it's fairly early on in the course that we get picture B. And in that picture, he's talking about how during the night, we have these planetary forces that enter into the Earth on one side of the Earth, the dark side of the Earth, and they move right through the planet and sort of express themselves out the other side of the Earth. And so we get this image of these direct forces coming at night, and then the indirect forces coming out the Earth during the daytime side. Now, of course, this particular phenomena is taking place on a 24-hour cycle, because, of course, we have day and night going on continually. Now, he tended to mention this particular activity when he was talking about the formation of animal skeletons. And he was, so he was connecting that to this morphology of the skeleton most often, from my reading of the situation. He then also talked about this direct and indirect process that we see in diagram A here, where we have the Earth and we're receiving direct forces from Saturn, but we also can receive Saturn forces that bounce off the other planets. So the Saturn forces bounce off the sun and come to the Earth, or bounce off the moon and come to the Earth. And so we have this incredible complex of all these forces sort of bouncing off all the other planets. Now, I don't remember him actually talking about the practical application of that process. He just describes that process as these direct and indirect activities. And then, of course, we get in the, I believe it's the 6th lecture, when he's giving us that planetary discussion. He talks about how the planets come directly into the soil, and then they come out of the soil. They bounce, as it were, out of the Earth and come straight back out. And so this is all taking place in the one place. They come in and then they come out. And again, this is a constant process. And if we read that 6th lecture very closely, we will see that he does tell us about these direct and indirect interplanetary activities together. It is obvious once you see it in the 6th lecture. So this, however, this particular pattern C, is the pattern, I believe, that's most useful to us when we're wanting to understand the cosmic and earthly activities and the planetary processes that we work with within the particular plant. And so what that means is that we can say this direct and indirect processes are most obvious in the stage 2. Now, one of the interesting confusions is that, of course, the indirect processes, we have one outer planet activity and one inner planet activity, and the same with the direct. We have one inner planet and one outer planet, but you know, it can sound a little bit complex, but if we look at this diagram, we'll see that it's the incarnating outer planets that become these indirect outer planetary forces, and it's the inner planet secondary processes that become indirect forces, and the same with the direct forces. You know, similar polarities is starting to show up. Now, I should just make a comment that if you read Enzo, he doesn't make this differentiation. He sort of places the incarnating with the direct and the excarnating with the indirect, something similar. And he sort of lumps a lot of different references into this basic polarity, whereas I don't believe that's true. Obviously, the picture I've presented here is how I see that. Now, just the other pictures on this page, of course, we're using that Lecture 8 diagram of the cosmic and earthly activities as the reference. And then we have to sort of see all the different layers of the picture. And so those 6 layers that I've put there in a sense are the internal activities. And then, of course, we can find them externally as well. So, you know, we need to understand the onion of the reality that we're trying to understand in biodynamics. And at what stage are we, you know, when we're working with these planets? You know, are we at the leaf good stage, or are we at the agriculture course stage, or are we at the Manners Symphony stage, if that makes some sort of sense. Now, of course, these, it all can seem a little bit intellectual, but it then becomes, how do we read the agriculture course based upon this understanding? And we can look at that in a minute, We've been going for about 40 minutes, and this gives you the sort of overview of the story and how we can approach this contradiction of these double planets. And I think it's probably a good idea to, give you the opportunity to ask some questions if that's appropriate.
But sorry, I've only just not long ago joined you because I'm busy on the farm, but it's not related really, but concerns the burning of the skins for the
peppering
rats particularly. Is that something you can talk about, or maybe later at the end or something?
Well, we can talk about that quickly. So the indications that we're getting there is that there should be a superior conjunction of Venus with the Sun in Scorpio. Now, interestingly, that only occurred just before the agriculture course, if we look at the astronomical circumstance. And so the superior conjunction of Sun and Venus doesn't actually happen in the constellation of Scorpio within our lifetime, from what I understand. It's coming back again in the future, but it's not. So basically, you just have to look at Venus and Scorpio really as the planetary indication that people use for burning the skins and so forth. What more would you like to?
Well, I just haven't. Last year I used one of Enzo's preparations, and it didn't seem to have a great effect. And this year I've tried doing it on the right time in the Maria Tun calendar, which was before Christmas. Well, we've got a lot of rats around still, and we have got chickens, so that's why we've got rats. But yeah, I wish I could show some effect from the peppers.
Right. Now, I suggest you have a talk with Peter Backus in New Zealand, but talk to him on email or whatever, because he has looked at this, and he has this idea about the two types of ash, that we have a sort of alkaline ash and acid ash, as it were, and we want the carbon ash rather than the potassium ash, and so he will often, once you've burnt the ash and got it to quite a fine powder, he'll put it in water and stir it around a bit, and that takes off this potassium ash, dissolves it, and so you then run it through a filter paper and dry that out, and then that carbon ash is more appropriate, and so we have seen some quite good results from peppering when we've done that extra step. And so that would be the only addition, I think, that I could say to what most people do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's
what I can say, really.
Yeah,
now, there's I've done some work. It's not exactly peppering. Yeah. So on my website, there's a thing called the Circle of Everything, and I won't go into that now because it's a bit off on the left-hand side. But in there's a spot in the circle where you can collect the energy of the rats, and you can spray that, and that's been showing some interesting good effects. Okay, we got to this point where we're sort of looking at this understanding of these cosmic and earthly activities, and the point is how is this applied? How can we use this? And one of the pieces that I find most fascinating is really this situation about fungus. And you know, we have the 6th lecture here. Area around fungus is also slightly unclear, you know, because we have this situation where Steiner talks about the full moon. The full moon being so strong that it leads to this very active, watery environment, and that these forces that are in the earth are sort of raised up into the plant sphere, and that there's these forces of vitality that are so strong that vitality then leads to the development of fungus within the plant leaves. And so, you know, he makes this comment that it's very strange that it's too much vitality that leads to the development of fungus. And he then goes on and, of course, mentions how the equisetum can be used as a force to, in a sense, suppress this very strong earthly activity. Now, you know, biodynamics, I think, still has issues around fungus. Equisetum isn't the cure-all that I'm sure we would all like it to be. But the point is that when we're looking at this fourfold story with the cosmic and earthly activities, we can see that it's you've got 4 players, not just 2. It's not just a sort of too much watery and not enough atmospheric activity, but in the earth we have this earthly substance process, and at the same time we have these cosmic forces. And so when we're talking about too much vitality coming from the earth, we're talking about this earthly substance activity being too strong. And of course that pushes off the atmospheric forces, which are both cosmic substance and earthly forces. They're being pushed off, and that lets this watery process dominate. Now, while it's pushing off that atmospheric cosmic process, it's also suppressing the cosmic forces coming from the earth. And so we can see that this earthly substance process has to be contracted. And so while we can see the equisetum acting as a pushing down influence, we can also remember that in the 5th lecture, Steiner talks about oak bark and how the oak bark can get, you know, an overly active etheric activity and draw that into the physical body. And so, you know, that should be part of any fungal process that we might want to organize. But we also have to see that cosmic forces activity is being suppressed as well. And I sort of noticed that when I was growing on very sandy soil, in the 2nd lecture, Rudolf Steiner was talking about clay. And I know it's quite common for people to say that clay is the middle between the calcium and the silica processes. But in the 2nd lecture, he says 3 times that clay is used for bringing up the cosmic forces out of the earth. And when I was growing on very sandy soil, volcanic ash soils, what I noticed was we grew really good roots and we grew really good leaves, but the plants would just peter out. And as soon as it would go off to flower, we would get fungus coming in from above. And so once I started putting clay into the soil, what we had was that the plants could then carry on and they would set viable seed and we wouldn't get this fungus taking place. And so in this picture that we have in front of us here, the earthly matter is so dominant that we could say, you know, just imagine this is like a dominant woman, you know, in a relationship. She's so strong that the man gets suppressed. And so part of this process of this dominant earthly matter is that the cosmic forces are suppressed in this fungal process. And so that we really need clay in any kind of fungal remedy to help push up this cosmic forces out of the earth so that it will carry on through, right through to the seeding process. And so, you know, it's quite important that we use this fourfold process to understand the situation that we have to deal with. You know, obviously the 8th lecture is a place where he talks about the same 4 forces, but when feeding animals and the process that you know happens where you know where we've got digestion taking place, and that digestion has to be strong enough that it can ash the substance enough so that there are these forces that move up into the head and form the substance of the brain, which then allow the brain to receive cosmic forces from above, which work down again back into the metabolism to fill the animal out. So he's giving a similar picture in the 8th lecture for feeding animals, and that we can use that same process when we're looking at growing plants and particularly solving fungus. So you know, if we extrapolate that story from the cosmic and earthly activities that he's mentioning into the planetary references, then, you know, again, we're sort of coming back to this fourfold image of the planets that I've been outlining. So, yeah, that's the overview of how I approach and understand these different influences. You know, obviously, this is just something that you can start to work with, of course. Now, I've written all sorts of things about this, because the first time I wrote this story was back in the late 1980s, and I've addressed it a couple of times since then. And of course, more recently, I looked into all Rudolf Steiner's seasonal lectures that I mentioned earlier. And as I say, it shows a further step in this development. And we've got some time, so we can have a quick look at that. And so what we sort of have in this picture, the top picture here, is coming out of the 1923 Manus Symphony of the Creative Word lecture series. And so what we're talking about is the seasons and how we start at spring on the eastern side there, on the right-hand side. But the biodynamic year really starts at winter. And in these lectures, he's talking about these elemental beings and how during the winter time we have the gnomes working in the earth, and how they work to incorporate all of the growth processes from the previous season with the earthly physical, etheric, astral, spirit forces, and that they bind together to form what he calls wood sap, and that this is this initial growth force that comes up in the springtime. So this is very much that sort of earthly substance process where we've got this, substances of the earth being bound together and rising up in the springtime. But that has to be met by what he calls the life sap, so that the water and the light of the environment have to come in and bring these life processes to that earthly process that's coming up, so that we have photosynthesis occurring and new substance and new plant matter is being developed. So this is very much that sort of leaf and flowering processes that we find in the earthly substances, in the earthly forces processes, where we have this etheric process taking place, and that this carries on, and after, around the beginning of the spring equinox, we have this development of these light processes strengthening, but it's not really until a month or so before midsummer that we can see that the warmth processes start to become stronger, and this is where we have the plants moving into the fruiting stages, and of course this is where the atmospheric light and warmth becomes really important in the growth processes to mature the plant. And of course these are the activities that we associate with the cosmic substance process, the light and warmth that comes from above, and then of course as we come into the autumn time, we see all of these growth processes from that season contracting down into the earth again, and this is where we have a lot of these humus formation processes. The phosphorus process becomes strong into the earth, and this is where we can associate these cosmic forces. And so it's in this process that we find these four activities in a different arrangement to what we get in the agriculture course. And as I say, this is the seasons, this is the physical reality that we're having to deal with. And so, yeah, it's meaning we need to be able to, even move the agriculture course on a stage. Now, the picture at the bottom on this page is a similar story, a little bit more static, but it's a similar story that I developed by reading the medical lectures. And those were predominantly the 1920 and 1921 medical lectures. So there's about 35 lectures there. And he gives lots of stories in those lectures. And this is how I sort of put those stories together. The basic picture, the red lines and then the white curvy line and the yellow circle and the white circle. This picture actually comes from the 1924 medical lectures, the pastoral medicine lectures. And he's sort of drawing this as an image of those primary spiritual activities, the spirit, astral, etheric, and physical. And in those lectures, he talks about how illness manifests by these bodies getting out of order. So, you know, this is an artistic representation of how those activities can be incorporated with all these other lectures. So when I did that, of course, I came up with this same order that I've just described of the cosmic and earthly activities. So that's where I first saw this third stage. But as I say, once I saw the seasonal activities taking place, they fitted into this same pattern. So that's led me to look at this 3 stages of planetary organization. So yeah, that's where we've come to. Now, I think that's it. That's basically the talk that I've organized. So you know, if there's questions, please ask. This page here gives you access to my email if you wish to talk to me, and 2 websites. The Glenopathy website has a lot of books and pictures, and you know, I've looked at biodynamic questions over the years, and I've written essays about various things like constellations and signs and all sorts. BD Max is actually my business website. I make homeopathic biodynamic preparations to do various things, and they are available there at the BD Max.